today. Joining me now, senior reporter Carolyn Marcus and former Liberal MP Nicolle Flint. Let's pick up on net zero if we can, because it's fast apparent there are not too many within the Liberal Party willing to back it in, at least publicly. According to the Daily Telegraph, only 3 Liberals backed keeping the targets as they are, the 2050 target. Jane Hume, Julian Leeser and Andrew McLaughlin, 2 there, of course, are senators. They backed in the target, and a whole lot of other well-known moderates who might say privately off the record they like net zero, they declined to state so publicly. So, Nicolle, this tells me that if even the moderates are having a hard time selling this policy, I mean, when even Bill Gates says the game's over, you've got to wonder why on earth it's still such a political, potent issue in Australia.
Well, I think it's still such a potent issue in Australia and with voters because we haven't seen the centre-right, so the Nationals and the Liberals, doing the work to carefully explain to the Australian voters why we need to drop net zero. And Peter, I've said this on your program previously, about 6 weeks ago, which coincided with a news poll showing that 62% of Australians either supported the current action on climate change or increased action on climate change, and only 28% said we needed to slow down because of the cost. I could not be more delighted that we've seen the work by the Page Research Centre, the Nats think tank, and full credit to Gerard Holland and his team for that exceptional piece of work, because this is precisely the thoughtful, researched information we need to be talking to the Australian people about in great detail. What we also need to do on this issue is start an Advance Australia-style campaign that the like of which we saw with The Voice, which turned the polls around, and we managed to, thankfully, successfully defeat The Voice. I'm just really disappointed that we don't seem to be seeing that sort of work coming out of the Liberal Party. I hope it's there. I hope that I'm wrong, that it doesn't exist, but we haven't seen it yet. And if we're going to drop net zero, we have to see that work. We have to promote this throughout every community, because you will not win back seats like Boothby, my former seat in South Australia, or any of the Teal seats or the urban seats that we've lost, if we don't explain to people carefully why we are dropping net zero.
Yes, I've made the point plenty of times in this program, Caroline, that they've got to actually make a decision and do it quickly, because as Nicolle says, they can't absent themselves from the debate. If they are going to walk away from net zero, and I advocate they should, no ifs, no buts, no, fig leaf of an aspiration, they then have to spend every single day between now and polling day at the next election explaining why they're doing it and putting up an alternative. It's not good enough to have a position and then hide under the bed and not advocate for it like they had with nuclear. But just going back to this issue with the moderates, because they are basically the supporters that are propping up the leader at the moment, they're not prepared to say publicly to the Daily Telegraph that they're backing in net zero, but at the same time they're telling the Australian that they're willing to go to war over this. Now, that's a huge issue. If they won't move off net zero, but they're not prepared to go out there and argue for net zero, well, they're in the worst possible world.
They can't have it both ways, can they, Peter? I think privately it's quite clear that a lot of them don't back net zero because they truly believe that this is the best thing for the world and the climate and for Australia. They back it because of naked political posturing, because they think it will help them hold on to inner city seats, fight off the teal wave, but they don't believe in it with conviction. And I think that's why they're not willing to publicly support it. I think Susan Lee's in a bit of a lose-lose situation here. I agree with you. I think net zero is not the way to go for the party. We've already seen the polling recently, which have showed Conservative voters are abandoning the coalition. They're moving to One Nation, and it's because of things like energy policy and the lack of a good argument that the Liberals have been able to mount for the policy that they took to the last election. They need to be able to fight this. And so far, Susan Lee's been saying, well, look, we don't have to come up with a policy yet because it's 3 years or so to another election. Well, clearly they do, because they need that much time to convince people to come back to the party and to vote for them. But look, I've always argued Susan Lee, I think, unfortunately for her, she's been a placeholder this entire time. I don't expect the Liberals to ever be continuing with her to the next election. It's always a matter of not if, but when she ends up getting rolled. And with this, on top of some of her recent captain calls recently about Kevin Rudd, about Albanese's T-shirt, which I happen to agree with personally, but many people within the party didn't, I think that it is closer to happening sooner rather than later.
Nicolle, can you imagine, though, if they did walk away from net zero, and I make the point, Tony Blair says, leave it, it's over. Bill Gates says, green manana, time to move on. And the Libs already do not support the 2035 targets. How the heck do they support anything in 2040 and 2050? Put that to one side. Imagine they're not backing net zero, and then next year Australia hosts that COP conference in Adelaide, as Chris Bowen and the Prime Minister are desperately trying to do. And Australians not only know now that it'll cost them $1 billion, but they see that money being spent, they see the chaos on the street, they see all the activists. I just think that's a gift to the coalition, if only they were smart enough to grab it.
Well, I have a very strong view on this, Peter. I want that conference in Adelaide in South Australia, because literally every single day in the Adelaide Advertiser, we read about another cafe, another restaurant, another small business that's closing because of the appalling economic situation the state and federal Labor government have put us in. So I want that conference for all of our businesses right here in South Australia. But I have a much better way to fund it, because I do not think that Australian taxpayers should pay for this. I think we should ask the likes of Twiggy Forrest and Simon Holmes-A-Court and Malcolm Turnbull, and we should ask all of the multinational renewable energy companies to bankroll this for the good of Australia, to put their money behind what they believe in, and bring all of these international people here so they can boost the South Australian economy.
Well, Chris Bowen's free power during the day offer yesterday didn't even survive 24 hours. Experts are out there, Caroline, saying that basically it's a dog of a policy. Who's home during the day to turn on the dishwasher and do what Bowen says? And Saul Kavonik, who we have on this program, he's an energy analyst. He says there's no such thing as a free lunch. He goes on to say that what happens here is the prices of or the free electricity during the day will have to be offset by higher prices at other times of the day to cover fixed costs. It's also been slammed by the Australian Energy Council as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's right. There is no such thing as a free lunch or free electricity. There are going to be people out there who think, woohoo, free power. But as you point out, that there's a very limited number of people who this will apply to. First of all, it only applies to people who are on a default market offer, as it is people with certain devices in their households, which outside of Victoria is only 40% of the population. But on top of that, the retailers are going to have to recoup their margin somehow. So if you're going to have free electricity in the middle of the day when hardly anyone is at home to use it, bar maybe the pensioners and unemployed and some public servants working from home, then people who need it, like most of us, after work, after school, in the evenings, when it's coldest, when we need to run our appliances, we're going to have to pay higher costs. They're not going to be giving it away for free. It's going to come off somewhere else. So ultimately, what this is going to lead to is people being penalised for using electricity when they actually need it. And that is obviously a terrible thing for the country. But not only that, it's going to have other unintended consequences, which perhaps Chris Bowen hasn't carefully thought through. Experts are warning it could also lead to greater demand from the coal industry and less demand and less people wanting to actually go to solar and use renewable energy. So ultimately, it may not even help the government meet its renewable energy targets. So perhaps they want to bring that one back to the drawing table.
Before we go, I want to get a quick comment from both of you about the decision this afternoon, our time, for the New Yorkers to have elected Zoran Mandami as their next mayor. He gave a long-winded socialist diatribe as an acceptance speech, much of it aimed at Donald Trump. Have a listen.
And if there is any way to terrify a despot, it is by dismantling the very conditions that allowed him to accumulate power. This is not only how we stop Trump, it's how we stop the next one.
Nicolle, I can't see how New Yorkers voted for this bloke. He wants to hit the rich even harder. 1% of New York's population pay 50% of the taxes. The rich are going to leave. Everything basically under this bloke is for free. But on the issue of 9/11, he's made it less about the victims of 9/11 and more about poor old Muslims and women in headscarves, how they felt in the years after 9/11 in New York City. I think if you were a Jewish American living in Manhattan or anywhere in the boroughs of New York, you would feel very, very uncomfortable tonight.
This is an extraordinary decision by voters in New York, and gosh, I think it's hugely concerning as to how this will unfold, not just for all of the reasons that you've mentioned, Peter, but such an aggressive speech firmly aimed at Donald Trump. That's not good for the American people and for calm, stable democracy.
Yeah, I have to say, Paris, London, and now Caroline, I think New York are basically cooked.
Well, I think it's very boring for New York because obviously economically he is a socialist. So Trump calls him a communist. He's offering free freezes on rent, free public buses, and free childcare, and all of that obviously comes at a cost. Higher taxes for big companies, for the richest in society. As you say, they'll leave. But culturally, I think it's a real concern as well, not only because of the comments he's made about post-September 11, I mean, the worst terrorist attack on the West in recent times. But this is the biggest Jewish population in America. This is someone who refused to condemn genocidal slogans like globalize the Intifada during his campaign. He made something of a turnaround towards the end when he realized that it could cost him. But he is firmly pro-Palestine, has called the Jewish state an apartheid state, accused them of committing genocide in Gaza, which we know has not happened. And this is someone who's going to be leading the biggest Jewish state, a Jewish city in the world. I think it's really disturbing, some of his extremist rhetoric. But the one silver lining could be that it does, well, at least for Trump and the MAGA movement, is that it attracts even more people to that, because Trump will use this to say to Americans from all over the country that this is where the Democratic Party is heading. And if you vote for me and my people, my team, at the next election, then you're going to be saved from this happening to your own city or state. So not great for New York, but perhaps positive for the rest of the country in the future.
We will see. You're an optimist. I think there's going to be a hell of a lot of damage done before we get to that point, but we'll see. We'll leave it there. Thank you both.